of commercial work as well as show work. Sometimes I jump in and work on Archer, as well as worked for Coca-Cola, Sprite, NBA, Domino's Pizza, and stuff like that. Before then, I lived in Korea for about 7 years, where I got my master's degree, worked at a small animation studio for a little bit, and learned the production side of animation in the sense of buying and selling animation. And from there, I moved to digital animation, where I also worked on Gravity Falls, Family Guy, Scooby-Doo, Venture Brothers, and a whole bunch of other fun shows. So, yeah.
Hi, my name is Ginger. I'm actually originally from Thailand, and I came to the US to study animation at SCAD, and also currently I'm an animator at Leo Learning, which is a learning company. I'm also intern at Floyd County for Archer, and previous to this, last year I also was the Computer Animation Festival host, producer in Thailand for SIGGRAPH Asia, and also worked with SIGGRAPH in the US Special Interest Group in Computer Graphics.
All right, so how did the three of you come to your decision to work overseas?
So I was broke, and I graduated from school in 2008, and I was not prepared. I didn't have a portfolio. I was trying to apply to jobs with just images on my website and stuff like that. So I couldn't get a job in animation, so I said the next best thing was to live in a foreign country. So I actually went to Korea to teach English. So I taught English in Gwangju, Jeollanander, which is in the south of Korea, and I did that at a portfolio. I said no, but I can have one, and then after the next 4 months, I sent them my portfolio, and then they were like, "You want a job?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And so that's how.
You're truly an outlier. Right?
Right.
It's like,
I
hey,
did
you
not
random
do it on
person on the
purpose.
tour. Would you like a job? Do you have a portfolio? What's a portfolio? You're hired.
Basically.
So I just graduated from SCAD, Savannah College of Art and Design, in 2004. And then I finished my classes up in 2005.
God damn, has it been that long?
Right?
Jesus, fucking old. Sorry.
But,
It happens to all of us. It happens to everyone.
after that, a lot of grad students, they pretty much stagnate. They kind of was like, okay, we're not going anywhere. We've been shipping our portfolios out to people. We're not going anywhere. So I had the brilliant idea of saying, hey, maybe my portfolio would be stronger in Korean. I speak Korean, which I thought I did at the time. Didn't really. But I said, hey, I can speak Korean, I can speak English. My portfolio would be stronger in Korean. So off I went and discovered that I didn't know Korean at all. And my mother then gave me the idea to go to grad school to get my master's degree. So, and at the same time, go to a Korean learning class. So I learned how to speak Korean, became more fluent in the language while also getting my master's degree. It was there that I met, anybody know this anime called Wonderful Days? Does anybody know that anime? It was an old anime, but anyway, the director of that guy was my professor, and he came up to me one day and was like, hey, do you need a job? And I said, yeah, I need a job. So he was like, come work for me. So we went to his studio, and I did some stuff for him there. I shadowed the producer, and I started to learn a little bit about the ins and outs of the Korean industry and how the animation industry works in Korea. But then, through luck, or I guess, I don't know, through bad luck, the studio fell on bad times, and I wasn't paid for 4 months, and I was calling my mom every other day. It's like, Mom, I need some money. Could you wire me some money? And she'd be like, don't you have a job? And I'd be like, yeah. And she's like, are you getting paid? And I was like, no. She's like, then what are you doing? So I was about to make my trip back to the U.S., but I met Deborah through a mutual friend of ours, and she was like, hey, just come to our studio. And I was like, okay. So I show up, I met Young-ah, and she looked at my stuff, and she was like, okay. So she asked the art director there, Eddie, who was a really cool guy, tough boss, but cool guy, said we can work with him. And next thing you know, I'm working on Batman, Brave and the Bold, and then Family Guy, and so on and so forth.
Well, mine was a little different because my background was in web design, UX, UI. And in Thailand, back in 2005, which I graduated from an undergrad degree, there wasn't a very robust animation industry just yet. Now there is, because my friend's studio now has like around 400, 500 animators, and then they outsource for Rango and DreamWorks TV. They do the Spirited Away and Fast and Furious one that's coming out on Netflix later. But back then, it wasn't robust. So I was doing more of the multimedia, but my heart was more in storytelling. So I decided after a while that, hey, maybe I should do my master's in animation. So my intent wasn't originally to work. It was to kind of like get more education and maybe like one day go back. So when I first came here, I also went to SCAD, and that was because my friend who was also Thai, she was actually working at Floyd County for Archer. Back that time, it was Radical Axis. And Radical Axis actually came to Thailand, and they wanted to start a studio there. And they actually contacted me and asked if I wanted to help them project manage stuff, but they were going to pay really, really low. And then I was going to come to SCAD anyway, so I said no, thank you. So when I came over to SCAD, then I started networking, meeting different people, especially since Floyd County is right next door, like Atlantic Station. Oh, well, before it wasn't Atlantic Station, but a lot of SCAD students went there, basically. So I started networking with different people, and then eventually I worked with the ASIFA, International Animation Society of the South, and started to meet more different people as well, too, and then like started finding different things. But my main concern was more about visa. I mean, which we'll probably touch about later too. So that was my main goal, was the studying first helped me to get a visa that allowed me to work in my field. And so that's what I do through a lot of different type of networking as well.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about our experiences being a fish out of water and working overseas. What was that like culturally, professionally, romantically? And what you had to do to adapt to your new surroundings.
So for me, coming from Thailand, the US is one of the very hardest places to get a visa, especially in this political climate. So one of the things you have to know is if you're trying to get an H-1B visa, which is the normal visa that most international students have to get, and you're going to face visa issues wherever you go if you're trying to work in a different country, except maybe Australia, because you can actually apply there for visa. But with the US, they usually have only one opening every year, which is in April. And it's a lottery system of 85,000 for the whole year. Usually it fills up within 2 or 3 days already. So if you're here to study though, and you're doing like a degree, you actually have 1 year after you study to actually work in the field that you want in anything. And if you're in a STEM major, which is science, technology, engineering, and math, and animation falls under that if your school applies for it, then you get an extension of around 2.5 more years, which gives you 3.5 years to do that. So definitely, if you're looking to go to a different country to work, student visa might be a good way to go, since you're actually also learning things and networking as well. What was the question again?
Describe your experience being a fish out of water.
Yeah, but when I came to the U.S., I was actually the first place I actually went to was South Carolina for an exchange program with my university in Thailand, and I had this really weird paradigm shift because I didn't know that the U.S. didn't deliver McDonald's. No, I mean, like in Thailand and different countries in Asia, they actually do McDonald's delivery. So for me, coming from like what we consider a third world country, I was like, McDonald's doesn't deliver in the U.S.? Like everything I've heard about is just wrong. And the other thing too is because I started out in South Carolina, there was and also like Atlanta, there was a lot of black people. So I always thought, okay. Yeah. So for me, I was like, okay, Atlanta is full of black people, and America is full of black people. But then I went to LA and went to Santa Rosa, and I was like, what happened? So culturally, it's a bit weird because, I mean, coming from Thailand, all you see is whatever they represent on Hollywood. So they try to give you this kind of stereotypical look, and we're more passive. So where everything is about community, nobody wants to say anything outwardly. They're like, oh yeah, that's fine. And inside the back, they're like, that's not fine. But in America, everybody's all like, hey, don't do that, or something like that as well. So there's a little bit of a cultural adaptation.
For me, I feel like I was lucky to teach English first because it allowed me to learn about the Korean culture, because the Korean culture is very interesting for someone from America and someone who's like an introvert and someone who doesn't like being stared at, but you're black and you're in Korea, so you're always stared at. So And then I had like a totally different experience than he did because I didn't speak fluent Korean. And so, yeah. I mean, in art, it's very easy to just be like, make it bigger, make it smaller, learn your colors and all that stuff. And we made it work. I worked there for a year without speaking fluent Korean, and I did my job. So, other things, culture. I mean, I had a boyfriend in America, so I didn't have to worry about that.
But you were in Korea, right?
With Korean,
Talking about the long distance relationship.
No, we don't need to go through that. But like,
That'll be the after panel.
and Korean dudes are too pretty, so I probably wouldn't have dated anyway.
You said they're too pretty.
I need a manly man, and so.
He's only half, so you're only offending half of him.
No, he's. I mean, let me stop now. But yeah, culturally, it just was very different. Things are very communal. So I went to lunch with people a lot. Even when I worked at my schools, I went to lunch with them, but they spoke Korean to each other. So I was just in my own little world.
Is isolation ever an issue?
I am good with isolation, so it was never an issue. I don't
You should
like
play the lotto. Just show up,
I mean,
get a job, don't speak the language.
people are cool, but I didn't need to talk to them, so so it was totally fine. I'm an artist. I can be in my own little world. So culturally, it just the reason I left was they kept staring at me, and I was over it. So people would be like, "Oh, just pretend you're on a runway," and I'm like, "That's just not my personality." And so, but I would highly suggest that anybody from America live in a foreign country just to get perspective and realize like people in other countries don't care about Americans, which is humbling. And so, but it was a really enjoyable experience.
Yeah, so.
Here we go.
If I was to go into the full breadth of my experience, we'd be here.
We only have an hour.
I know, right?
Summarize it.
So, basically, it started off high, and this is the general experience of most foreigners that come to Korea, from what I've experienced, or from what I've seen. And you start off with this high, right? It's freaking great, you're here, right? And then it's just the little things, right? And slowly but surely, those little things just keep knocking and knocking and knocking and knocking. And eventually you just have enough. Like Deborah, when she left because people were staring at her. And it wasn't like they hadn't seen black people before. There's black people in Korea. But it's just, those kinds of things where it's just, it rides on it, right? For me, I'm not good with crowds. I don't like to deal with too crowded areas. In Korea, it's the norm to shoulder check people, And so I'm just walking, minding my own business. Next thing you know, somebody just bumps me on their shoulder and just like, word, no excuse me, no nothing, just gonna keep going. And it gets building up, right? Mm-hmm. Other things that bothered me was actually learning the language was problematic for me. And the reason for that is because when you know the language and you look Korean and you've experienced a little bit of Korean culture, right? You lived in it, right? Kind of, sort of, an Americanized version of it. And you go to Korea, I know my wife's giving me mean looks right now, she's like, but when you go to it and you experience it, it's a different entire thing. And then when you speak the language, all of a sudden, a lot of that expectation of culture and that kind of lifestyle, I guess, is pushed upon you, and you expect it to follow through overnight. And me being born and raised in Virginia, I wasn't going to be able to change my mentality or my the way I took things. It was very American. So when certain aspects of Korean culture started to clash with my American side, it really became a struggle. And towards the end, and generally this is how it works with most foreigners when they go to Korea, by year 7, you're done with it. You just completely hate it. Now, I'm not going to say that's for everybody, because there are some lifers in Korea who live completely happy with being in it. It's just, for me, I was just done.
Do you think a mistake on your part may have been speaking Korean when you got there?
You know, I really thought about that at one point. I was very certain that, you know, if I was to ever do this experience again, or if I was able to go back in time and say, hey, bro, if you go to Korea, don't learn Korean. But ultimately, I think it was just my mindset wasn't flexible enough to adapt to it. And eventually, it just wore itself out.
But you were on another visa, right?
Yeah, I was in, the way I was able to get my visa was through lineage. My mom was a Korean citizen. So I was able to get my visa through her. So I was basically kind of technically a Korean citizen, just not a Korean citizen. Luckily, if I did this while I was in my 20s, I would have to go to the army. But because I was way past the military range, they decided to let me go. They were like, you can just go on as if you wanted to go. But yeah, it was basically living like a Korean citizen. I had my own Korean ID number. I had, I was paying bills, I was paying taxes, all that.
So let's talk about what aspect of working at your respective studios overseas was difficult for you.
So the initial part was basically when you were working in a small studio in Korea, right? You have to know a little bit about how how animation is run in Korea to understand a little bit of what I'm going through. But basically, long story short, is it's owned by the government. Korean animations, any kind of Korean show that you want to make is run by the government. So what they do is they basically hold a Hunger Games of sorts, where all the lovely animation studios, and there are a lot, they all pitch their ideas to the Korean government. Now the Korean government doesn't know what animation is. They don't know what's good, they don't know what's great. So what they do is they bring in producers from out of town, some people from Paramount, they'll bring in producers and directors from WB, Fox, whatever, and they'll sit them all in this room and they'll listen to your pitch. Whoever wins that battle gets funding for their show. Everybody else doesn't get funding. So you have to find a way to make ends meet. Unfortunately, the studio I was working at didn't win this competition. So for months on end, a lot of the workers were just working without pay. So that became a real difficult situation for me because as much as I enjoy animating, as much as I love animation, when you got bills to pay and your refrigerator is getting on empty and you have to call mom and explain to her you need money while you have a job is kind of a difficult thing. But when I moved to Animation, the difficult aspect came in the fact that I knew Korean. So Eddie would use me as the unofficial translator. He would basically bring in, like, say if he was reviewing a shot from Deborah's work or Adrian, who was French, he would bring me in to translate whatever he said to fix whatever. That became an issue when certain aspects couldn't get treated right, so he took his aggression and anger out on me.
He wasn't fluent in English, so he couldn't yell at us.
Yeah, so he basically took out everything on me. And that became a difficult experience in and of itself. But to me, like, I wouldn't change it for the world because I worked on things that, had I not been a part of that, I never would have been there. Like, there's episodes of Gravity Falls that the entire computer animated sequences that you see in the show where it's a car chase or whatnot, throughout the entire episode was done by me. I did it all by myself. That includes Venture Brothers, that includes for Family Guy too. Like, all the CG stuff was like mine, in a sense. So I took pride in my work. And that's kind of where I put my focus on. But, you know, it was still a fun experience. Eddie's a cool dude. I'm thinking about
Korea sounds horrible.
No.
You guys should come to Thailand.
No, have you guys ever seen this show on Netflix? I forget what it is.
Kimchi Slap?
No, not the kimchi slime. Cool. You said it was like Song of the Heart or something like that?
Oh, yes, about a cartoonist.
It's like about a cartoonist who lives in Korea. If you ever watch this show, right, there's a sequence
Whisper
here.
of the Heart. Whisper of the Heart?
Whisper of the Heart? I don't know the American name of it, and I can't remember the Korean name of it off the top of my head. But it's a Netflix Korean show about a webtoon comic artist, right? And there's a sequence on there that is completely true to how animation or how the industry works in Korea, how work just works in Korea. So all the workers, right, we can't leave our job until the boss leaves, right? So if the boss wants to leave at 1 a.m. or 2 a.m., we have to stay there till 1 a.m., 2 a.m. because of the, like you said, the communal team thing, right? But what's funny is I didn't understand this, but when I saw it on Song of the Heart or Whisper of the Heart or whatever, like it opened up a new mind to me because he can't leave until his boss leaves. And that boss can't leave until that other boss leaves. So it's like it becomes this entire domino effect, and I just died at that scene because I was like, I get it now. I get why he probably was staying longer.
Shit rolls downhill. Marisa?
We're talking about difficulties. Yeah. So I think the thing that's more difficult for me, not particularly working at a studio, is because I have visa restrictions. Like it tells what I can do or what I can't do or how I have to renew things. And one of the things is called e-verification. In the state of Georgia, if you have more than 10 like employees or public kind of company, it's a state law that it has to be e-verified. This is not true of companies in New York or LA. So so for me, once I was almost done with my 1-year training, I was trying to extend for my 2.5 years of STEM extension that I told you guys about. And within that time, I actually got a letter, email from the art director at Nickelodeon in New York, and she was like, "Oh yeah, do you want to come visit the studio and stuff like that?" Because she formerly came to SCAD and we were talking and we were vibing. So I went to New York to visit their motion graphics studio, and they really liked my work. They were like, "Oh wow, you have like cool stuff. You explain your process and stuff like that." And then I was asking them like, oh, so like usually if we work here, what's the work process? They're like, well, the thing we do is that we try to contract people first. So it's like monthly kind of basis. So it's like if you wanted to start here, you can try like a contract of month by month, something like that first until we kind of see if you want to do like if we like you full time and stuff like that. But the problem is I can't do that because once it hits my, like 1 or 2 months after, if I didn't go with my STEM extension with a company that was e-verified, I would have to leave the US. And this happens to a lot of international students here as well because my friend who works at Blue Sky Studio, she was able to be a lighter there for a year and then she had to go back to India because Blue Sky is not e-verified. Then my friend at Stupid Buddies, she wanted to do animation but she couldn't because of Stupid Buddies didn't want to e-verify her. And the thing is, e-verified is a free process, but sometimes some different states like sanctuary states, they might either not want the government to audit them, their HR crew might not understand the process or things like that, so they don't want to do that. But one of the suggestions I would have is that if you are planning to work in a different country or look into different things, always check the process yourself of how things work with visas so that you can actually give the HR the option. What I found out along the way is that not all HR knows how to deal with every situation. So my current company is also like, they're headquartered in the UK, and they've dealt, and they have an office here which deals with HR, and they know how to deal with American citizens, but they don't always know how to deal with international people, and if you don't know how to explain that process to them, then they might just not do it out of inconvenience. So I think that's the main thing that I have with the issue here. It's usually about visas, that you have to kind of know your own process when you go to a company and kind of be able to explain it to HR as well.
So, Roberto, you touched on this a little bit. Let's talk about work culture, right? Being Americans and being Thai. 2 totally different experiences, right? We come from a place where we have 80-hour work weeks, right? But overseas, they don't necessarily adhere to those things. So let's talk about, how that affected you for good and for bad. Because if you've come back now, and after being, forged in those fires, were there any benefits to having to stay at your desk till 2 a.m. and then come back at like 8 a.m.?
Okay. So, in that I started off as as a native English teacher, being a native English teacher is like a fairy tale land. You have 4 classes. If you're in a public school, you have 4 classes a day. Get nights off, weekends off. Like you can save half of your paycheck. They pay for your apartment and all that type of stuff. And then you transition to the real world of working in an animation studio. And you work, like I worked from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. Monday through Friday, and then 10 a.m. to like 3 to 6, like depending on when they wanted you to leave. And you know what? It actually got better by the time you got there, because I think they felt sorry for me as an American, and so they like started to do like, we would get 1 Saturday off a month. That didn't happen when I first was there. And then they would let, like during the week, they would let one of us off early. I felt like I made it better. Like they felt sorry for me, and they're like, she's not Korean, so we need to do this stuff. But like working 12-hour days is crazy. I never bought groceries because they pasteurize stuff differently, so it was spoiled quicker. I mean, it was realer. So they didn't have all the chemicals we have in America. So I just ate breakfast, lunch, and dinner at work. And then when you work 12-hour days, you don't have time to sit at your house and be like, okay, today was like Monday. And so one time it was Tuesday, and then the next day it was Thursday. And then I was like, what the hell happened to Wednesday? I'm dying quicker. This is not cool. And so,
what was that like for your morale?
I mean, it just was like, it wasn't too worrisome because I was working on Family Guy. It just was like, you didn't have that relaxed time. And in that I was young in my career, it didn't really matter, but it just was like, I just was worried about dying quicker. That was it. And so, but in that I was so like in my 20s, it was like, I just was appreciative that I didn't waste 4 years of my life getting a degree, because most people would change their major. And I picked animation. Luckily, I had a supportive father, and I picked the right thing. And then I would be sitting at my desk like, wow, I did the right thing. I didn't waste 4 years and $32,000 a year. And which, thank you, Dad, for taking most of my student loans. But it was like, okay, I picked the right thing. But like working a lot, and the 3 vacation days, which Roberto just told me why they gave you 3 vacation days a year. I used that at the end of my term because one of my friends came to visit me in South Korea. But
wait, they only gave you 3 a year?
Oh yeah.
Jeez. They count Sunday as a vacation.
Wow. It's like prison.
So there is a benefit of it. There, everybody loves this week called Chuseok, which is like Korean Thanksgiving. So it's like for that full week, nobody's working, and it's like everybody waits or like tries to schedule their vacation, those 3 vacation days around Chuseok, and it becomes like that hot day, right? But there was a fun little thing that happens in Korea is that a lot of people should know that. Well, if you don't know, Koreans love to drink, right? So the thing is, you work hard all day. The boss is technically supposed to take you out for drinks after work, right? Problem happens when the boss doesn't drink. So if the boss doesn't drink, then he has no reason to go to the bar, which means he has no reason to take you to the bar, which means you don't get to go drink.
Eddie is hilarious.
Eddie is awesome. Don't get me wrong, I'm making Eddie seem like this really bad guy. He's just a very tough boss.
He terrorized him. He literally terrorized him. Tell him the story about when you were on break and you went to go get lunch at Burger King. Tell him the Burger King story real quick.
Okay. No. So, this was during the time where, wait, no, what was the question again?
Tell him the Burger King story. I'm going to tell him.
All right. Okay, so there's this thing in Korea where we believe in teamwork, it makes the dream work kind of thing, right? It's a communal thing. I was the type of guy who liked to eat at my desk, I like to eat at my desk, I was comfortable there, and, one day we were like, yo, let's go to lunch. I was like, okay, I'm going to go to Burger King. So then he looks at it, he's like, all right, cool. We all decided to go to Burger King. So everybody in the whole team decided to go to Burger King, right? And I'm over there like, la, 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 right? And then I get my meal, everybody gets their meal, and I said, okay, I'm going to see you guys back at the office. And Eddie loses his mind. Like, he legitimately like just started screaming at me about teamwork and how all this is and how we're supposed to be like a family.
Were you like half bite into your sandwich? You were like watching a video on your phone?
It was like, no, I was literally like on my way. So like, yeah, it was kind of like that. I was like, you know, just kind of offhand. It was like, yo, I'm going to see you guys back at the office. And then he's like yelling at me in the middle, and the entire Burger King goes quiet. Like, everybody just like, that awkward silence that happens when somebody's getting this, scolded out of them. You know, it's like, ooh, he's giving him the business kind of awkward silence. And I'm just like standing there just getting yelled at by this man. And it's just like, it was to the point like it was as if he was like my dad. You know? It wasn't even like he wasn't yelling at an employee at this point. He was yelling at his son. He was just like,
Where did he move your desk after that?
So he moved my desk to a corner, like. But
Did you have a dust cap?
no, he didn't give me.
Where was his office?
So his office like was like right next to mine, right? So, you know, like we're laughing about it now, but at the time it was very serious because, yo, he's screaming at me in the Burger King. What's going on? So I went to Young Av and talked to her about it, and she
Young Av was the vice president.
She's the vice president of Animation. And she pulled Eddie up. And, you know, Eddie came back downstairs like, you know, the older brother, like, you snitched on me. Kind of thing. Like, that was his entire attitude. It, like, changed up. And I was like, oh, no, what'd I do? Right? And then when I told Khalil about it, he started talking about how Eddie knows my code to the door, because we don't have keys in Korea. We don't have house keys. We actually have door codes. So you open it and you press your code and you go in. And Khalil was joking like he knows the code, and he was like over there trying to get in, and I'm like, how did he get into my house? Oh my God, save me. But Eddie, like, honestly, I'm making him out to be a really bad guy, but he's not. He's a really sweet dude. Like, when you get to know him and you get to see like what he cares about.
He's so happy.
Why you smile like that? Are you sure about that? You know,
Well, when I was there,
am I the abusive dude? Like, the guy was like, he's gonna change.
When I was there, they actually, the lady from the
Stockholm
background
syndrome.
actually told me that I made Eddie nicer. I don't know what I did, but
Oh, fun tidbit. To back off that, what you were saying earlier about like how Korean life can be stressful and stuff like that. The average animator's life in Korea, in terms of career life, right, is only 2 weeks long. It only takes 2 weeks to know if you're actually about that life, because it's like in terms of like working in the work schedule and how busy it gets every day, and then having an art director scream at you about your scene, it can wear on you, and burnout is very real. So it only takes about 2 weeks before they say, okay, you know what, I'm going to Samsung, or I'm going to LG, and I'm going to do this there.
when I worked there, one girl quit after one day. I was like, really? You just spent 4 years getting a degree and you just quit? Okay. Did they tell you how hard animation was in school? Or, okay, guess not.
Did working those kind of hours benefit you when you came back to America?
Yeah, it was like, that's the one thing that I really liked about it, is that I equated to being in a hyperbolic time chamber, because I became very fast at what I do. So it's like I can knock out scenes. The average scene that I was working on was at least like around, on average, I had to do 60 scenes a week. And, you know, when I went to California and I was talking to a friend of mine who was working at DreamWorks, he was like, yeah, I worked on 3 scenes for 3 years. And I looked at him, I'm like, I do 60 scenes a week. You do 3 scenes in 3 years?
But they might spend more time refining some stuff.
But that's the thing, I mean, that's the equation, but like, or that's the trade-off. But I was like, dude.
But you're like a sweatshop factory, so.
Right? It's just like churning it out. The environment itself is not like, like if you go to a studio here, it's very open, it's very friendly, people chat, people talk. In Korea, it's very much like a library.
Yeah.
You go in there, you have your own cubicle, but you sit down, you're not supposed to talk to anybody. You're supposed to just look at your work and just work.
I was afraid to open a bag of chips.
Yeah, they get there like that. Fun tidbit though, like when I was first starting out, before I went to Animation, I was working at the small animation studio, right? My desk was like pretty open to everybody, and I was still kind of new to animation, so I didn't really know what was happening in terms of like how Korean culture worked. So I would literally be working on my scenes, but I would also have like a Netflix show going on at the same time. So, you know, that's kind of bad for business. It looks like you're not very productive, right? When you're bringing a client. Like my cubicle wasn't really like off to itself. It was very much in the open, in front of like open eyes. So if a client walked in, they literally saw like my work right there. So usually it was like you'll see my scene happening, but then you would see like a show or an anime or something that was going on at the same time. And because I didn't have full mastery of the Korean language yet at that time, which was hilarious, my supervisor would walk up to me and, you know, he would ask me, what are you doing right now, right? Now in Korean, he's actually scolding me, you know, because he's telling me to turn off the thing, but I didn't know that's what he meant. So I just looked at him, I was like, oh, I'm working on this scene right here, and just, you know, turning this out. And all the other Korean workers at the studio would be giggling and laughing because, like, they didn't realize, or they knew that I was being scolded, but I didn't realize it, and the supervisor didn't know how to address it. So he was just like, okay. And then he would just walk away. You know, my time at Studio B was a lot of fun. Hats off to everybody at Studio B. And I love everybody at Animation. And yeah.
And Marisa?
I forgot the question.
The work culture and its
Oh, the
influences.
work. Well, I don't trying to take everyone out of the gloom, the doom that like animation is a dying occupation and then you'll never make any money out of it. No, that's not true. It also depends on who you work for. So, like I said, my company right now that I'm working for is headquartered in the UK, and in the UK they have like specific laws that they follow. So my company also implements that. I was also interning at Moxie, which is another digital agency in Atlanta as well, and they also have a very similar kind of thing. There's maternity leave, there's paternity leave. I get off my work at around 4. If I finish it early, I'll just go home. And I have 28 days of paid work kind of thing, also full benefits. So think about, if you're in the US, you're looking for a job that might give you more benefits, maybe look for something that has a headquarter in the UK or like in Europe. Because the company that I was interning with as well at Moxie, Publicis, their head group is in Europe. And they also have a very similar policy as well too, where they're trying to give you a work-life balance. Although at certain times you may be required to put in overtime, but then that is not supposed to be a norm thing. But also realize that the company that I'm working for right now, they're working for clients that are more of like companies like Virgin Airline, or like Ogilvy, which is an ad agency. So they have differences where I'm currently not producing work that is going to go to a studio that has to be sold, that has to like be bought. This one is like clients that are agency clients. And then my friend who's like currently working at a financial firm as a lead designer kind of thing, he's in Atlanta. He's hitting around 100K right now. So don't 100% feel depressed all the time that you think that, oh, if you're going to be an animator, if you're going to be like in design, that you always have to expect to have low pay for your passion. Because that's one thing I'm very passionate about, is that you shouldn't think that, oh, I have to go into this field and then I'm going to have to grind forever because I have to do other jobs to support what I love. Because that's not always 100% what necessarily has to be or how the industry has to be, unless you expect it to be.
Would you say that it's easier or harder to get a job overseas or in America?
Well, the thing is, if you're going to go overseas, if you are okay with the visa stuff, it's probably easier because, my friends who are Indian, if they come to work in the U.S., they go back home, they easily get into a studio. My friend's studio at like the Monk Studio, they also do internships internationally. They also hire people from Pakistan and like different places as well too. But then you also have to like, sometimes people also ask like, oh, do you have to know the language to be there? You don't necessarily have to know the language to be able to communicate, but it's always good, like, I know you're like, oh man, but the thing is, because you are half Korean by nature, right? Then they expect you to be like, oh, you know Korean, you are Korean, you should know better. But like Deborah, even if, I have a feeling, even if you knew Korean and you were there, they'd be like, okay, she's a foreigner, so she would still get away with more. So you should use that as a benefit. Like, if you're a foreigner, use that as your benefit. You go in, you speak Korean, you speak any other language, you look cute.
Yeah. Oh my God, that is so true. Like, when I was teaching English, my first semester, I didn't like being like, hey, you in the black shirt, answer this question. So my second semester, I had them print out a seating chart, and I learned all their names. well, I didn't learn them. I read them, and they would be like giggling. I'm like, am I pronouncing it wrong? I would ask my co-teachers. They're like, no, they just think you're cute. I'm like, I'm a grown woman. I'm not cute.
Well, to be fair, like, you know, I still have my little foreigner experiences. You know, I would, especially when it came to food and eating, right? Korean, for whatever reason, they think that I haven't ever eaten kimchi before in the U.S. And like, so when we go out to eat and they see me eating kimchi like more than they do, they're like, "Oh my God, you eat kimchi so well! Wow, you know how to eat kimchi." And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm half Korean. I should be able to. You know, I eat this. It's okay." And it was like with all the like, it wasn't just kimchi. It was like other foods. So like, say we were having what's 자기야 고등어가 뭐지? It's like fish. I don't know. You know 고등어? Anyway, it's fish, right? So I would eat the fish, and they would look at me like, "Oh my God, you can eat that." Wow. Yeah, and then
That's Korean culture in a nutshell. It's just like all amazement. Like,
Yeah. But I mean, to be honest, when I'm in America, sometimes I do that too. I play stupid. I'm like, oh, what's this? Like, I don't have to work now. Just kidding. I don't do that often. Yeah. But also, like, coming from Thailand to here, one of the things is I studied in an international school. So I was already kind of adapted to it. But on a usual basis, when I go back to my own culture, sometimes I'm also in that half-between of like, oh, like she's Thai, but she's not 100% because she studied in an international school. So I'm a bit more outspoken than most Thai people. And so like when I go back to that culture, I also have to learn to adapt because sometimes there's hierarchies. If you go back to the country, you have to know that like, oh, you have to address this person by a certain surname. Like if there's someone who's older than you can't just be like, hey, what's up, man, kind of thing. You have to like for us, we'll have our like bow kind of thing. It's like a greeting, like sawadee ka kind of thing to our elders too. So there are certain things that you will kind of learn if you go to like a different country and how they work out. In America, it's almost like, hey Bob, like when I came to study at SCAD for my master's, and my professor was like, just call me Becky. I was like, no, Professor Becky, or like something to address her in the front. You want me to call you just Becky? Yeah, that was a very weird experience for me.
yeah, language is a big thing in Korean. So like, there are hierarchies in terms of how you're supposed to talk to people in terms of addressing. So like, you know, if you just speak like just without like any kind of formality, it's considered to be very rude. So unless you're very close to that person or unless you're the same age as that person, if you speak 반말, is what they call it, is rude. So you have to speak what they call 존댓말, which is like a more formal speak, but there's levels of that formality, right? So you say, well, let's take one word that I guess anybody who watched Korean shows and pop knows, probably know, 안녕하세요, right? 안녕하세요, broken down to 반말 is
hello.
Yeah. And then if you break it down to 반말 is 안녕, right? Now if you're saying 안녕 to your friend, okay. You say 안녕 to your mom, she may be going ahead and all right. But if you say that to your grandmother, she'll smack you, right? You have to say 안녕하세요. And if you say 안녕하세요, that's like the next level of formal, right? But it's not like, oh my God, you're not like really formal. Like, then you gotta go to above that, which is like 안녕하십니까, right? And then that's like more of like supreme formal, right? And you have levels to it. It's like 고마워, 고마워요, 감사합니다, 고맙습니다.
But if you're a foreigner, you'll just look kind of cute, or like just like, oh, it's a foreigner. That's why.
Like, oh my God, you speak Korean.
Yeah,
That's
oh,
so
you speak.
cute. Oh, yeah, 한국말 잘하시네.
Yeah.
And they'll say something like that.
But that's again the same thing where you're perceived as Korean, I perceive as Thai. So there's a different level of expectation.
Well, actually, I'm Kyopo.
Oh, happy, right?
No, Kyopo is a Korean who lives outside of Korea. So, Korean diaspora.
So, I'd like to open it up to any questions now. Anybody have something to ask? Any of these three? Just walk up to that mic.
What were the top 3 skills that you found to be most useful while being working overseas?
very powerful to know as a student or as a practicer of 3D is that once you learn one program, it doesn't matter what program you learn as long as you learn those basic skills, because you can transfer that over to any program. So once I knew Maya, all you're learning in Softimage XSI is the navigation. All you're learning in Cinema 4D, 3ds Max, Blender, well, Blender is trash, but all you're learning is navigation skills. I'm still trying to learn Blender. It's just counterintuitive, and I've been doing it for 5 years. But the very important thing to know is that just learn the program that you're comfortable with and understand that you can move to another program. Not a lot of students or people who learn it as a hobby realize that. They are stuck in like, oh, I know 3ds Max, I know Maya, but you know everything. You just learned in that program. So that's the top skill.
So for me, I'll go back to my daddy, Eddie. He taught me some very valuable things. To echo what she said, right? When I first came to Animation, they focused mainly on XSI Softimage. They didn't really know, they didn't work with Maya, they didn't work with Blender or Max or anything like that. They wanted to work with XSI exclusively. So I told Eddie that, I've never done XSI before, I've never worked with this program. And he looked at me and asked me, can you set a key? I said, yes. Do you know how to manipulate a camera? I said, yes. Do you know what a graph editor is? I was like, yeah. Then you know XSI. The second thing that he taught me was the difference between an amateur and a professional. Now, when I first was asked this question, I kind of naively answered an amateur gets paid, or an amateur doesn't get paid, a professional does. And that's not true at all. And everybody starts off with their field, wherever they're working at. Whether it's a paid internship or something, you're an amateur and you're getting paid for it. So the difference that I've learned between an amateur and a professional is a professional gets the job done. And what I mean by gets it done is he gets it to a point where he's happy with it and he'll show the client and he'll listen to what the client has to say. An amateur will find an error, fix it, and he'll find another error, he'll fix that, he'll find another error, fix that. And he'll keep fixing and fixing and fixing, and meanwhile the client is waiting and waiting and waiting. So an amateur doesn't know when to stop. A professional does. And the third thing that I learned, I guess, is speed. Speed is very important, especially when it comes to wanting to get stuff done. If your client is waiting too long, then what they're going to do is they're going to lose patience with you, and then they're going to argue with you and whatnot. You want to get your job done as fast as possible just to show the client whatever. You can look like trash, the client might love it. That's the whole thing. So, speed is very important.
Oh, pacing myself. Because when I came to America, I was like, oh no, if I don't take this opportunity now, I'll never get the next one, or I need to do this, I need to do this. And what ended up happening is that last year I took on way too much than I could. And I really suffered, and every day I was thinking to myself, oh, why am I even doing this? Why is this making me so miserable? And I was like, the work I'm doing is not making me miserable. It's me making me miserable because I refuse to let go of a lot of things that I felt were opportunities. So one of the things that I learned a lot was that if you don't have the bandwidth to do something, give it to someone else or let it go. Even if you think that, oh, this is a great opportunity, because if you die, you can't actually do anything because you're dead. So yeah, it's a difference between you actually lose years of your life just trying to get something done. You're like, I'm gonna do 5 all-nighters, and then you end up losing 10 years of your life, which is not a really good trade at all.
Very morbid.
Out of all those shows and projects that you worked on, which one gave you the best experience personally? What are your favorite projects that you worked on, whether it be fun or made you better at animating?
By trade, I'm actually a 3D modeler, so my favorite project was it season 10, episode 11 of Family Guy? I got to do a Batmobile, the 1986 Batmobile, and so I went to my supervisor and she was like, do you want to do a snake or a Batmobile? I was like, let me challenge myself. So let me do a Batmobile. I still ended up doing a snake later, but so it just was I didn't know conceptually how I was going to start the project because it was so complicated. But I looked up my reference image and just pushed through the project, and that was like a very defining moment for me. And I mean, it's on YouTube, so if you look up the Lazy Susan and the Batmobile that goes around in Batman's cave, I did that. But that was like a very complicated model, and I was really proud of myself for doing that.
For me, professionally, I hated working on Scooby-Doo. Mystery Inc. especially because WB would like literally ask for the weirdest things ever.
He asked for your favorite project.
Really? I thought you said his worst.
I'm gonna move on. I'm getting to that.
Happy.
All right? Now, hold on, because this is where it became interesting because it was also the most challenging. Trying to make a believable golem out of junk parts move around, right? Or something like a horde of monster cows, alien cows, right? This is stuff that I never have touched on before, like a freaking house with chicken legs is what we're making this happen in this episode. A house with chicken legs is moving and it's walking. We gotta do a run cycle, walk cycle, limb cycle. We gotta do it. And, you know, out of all the projects, most of the things that we did at Animation was just vehicles, right? It was just airplanes, boats, cars. But later on, I realized that, you know, doing a rock golem in WB, it was like probably like the best stuff that I always show on my demo reel because it was always the coolest looking thing. So for me, even though I hated working on it, it turned out to be some of the best stuff I've done. So I really, hats off to Scoobs. You know, Scooby-Doo, Mystery Inc., and what were all those like DVD movies? There was a whole bunch. The vampire with the werewolves and the circus, and you know, just shout out to WB for that. Because, you know, even though they asked for all these zany things, and I looked at it and I was like, what the hell is all this? You know, I'm just cursing. It was some of the best stuff I did.
So 2014, this was at SCAD where, like I said, my background was in web design when I came to SCAD to do my master's. So I was very unsure of my animation skills because I was like, I can move things, but can I move it well? I don't know. So in 2014, we had a short collaboration animation that we had to come up with, like me and like 3 other friends, like as a director of 4. And me and my friend, his name is Ueda, he's Japanese, and then he liked things that were more abstract, and I liked things that were storytelling, and we were head-butting a lot of times, but the problem was also because he was very passive. Sometimes he would also be like he would be visibly shaken, but then he won't say anything about it. And for me, that was even more scary because I'm used to dealing with people who might have outbursts or they say things, but when you see someone who refuse to say what they feel, then you feel like you've actually pushed them a bit too far. So for me, from that particular project, I had to like reevaluate my own self of how I was communicating. Like, was I too brash? Was I too blah blah blah? But that particular project, it was Oscar longlisted because it won the Atlanta Film Festival Jury Award, and it was the first full short animation that we did that I actually did that was narrative. So I was really proud of that particular piece. And with that also, like our group of friends is really hardcorely like connected and strong. That particular from that particular project, like you has learned, like he's become like really awesome with like his own communication stuff. Now he's at Rooster Teeth, and he's just like, I felt like from that project we all kind of learned who we were, who we didn't like to be, and grew from that.
Any other questions?
Hello. So I'm an international student trying to decide between staying here in the United States and going back home to India or going to another country. And I know a lot of people who do take the route where they go back, whether it's India or Thailand or wherever. They still chase the American companies. Like, you want to be in India, but you want to be BuzzFeed India. You want to be Netflix. You want to be Disney. Would you say it's better if you are working internationally to chase the American brand and try and stick with that name, or to involve yourself in the local content and the local studios and what the people there are making? Which one, is there one that's better? Is there one that does more work or pays better? Is there really any difference?
That's a good question.
So, from my experience, what I experienced with Korea, in terms of Korea, working at that small animation studio, which was considered local, it wasn't working on outsourced animation at all, it was a struggle in terms of pay. The work was cool, the work was fine, but in regards to pay, that was the main deal breaker for me. So if you're working at a small studio, or if you're working locally, then you have to understand that they're not getting the big bucks from Fox, they're not getting the big bucks from Disney, they're just getting whatever they can. So in regards to Korea, in their industry, because it's all government funded, everything is based off the government. Your studio lives and dies off of your show. So if you pitch your show and they say it and they don't like it, but they choose a different one, right? Then your company doesn't need it. You don't get paid. So in that regard, it can get very difficult. So when it came to working at Fox, because the company was actually being outsourced, or they were getting their funding from other companies, that's actually the preferred route for most animators who work in Korea, because when they're getting money from a Japanese studio, or when they're getting money from a Korean, an American studio, or from wherever, right? They're not having to struggle. They can actually pay off their workers. They can pay. And the pay is actually pretty decent and steady. So that would be the trade-off, depending on it. So, I mean, that would be what you would do.
Well, I think the main thing you have to also think about first is what you want to do. Like, what is your goal in the future? Is it that you want to better the industry in your country? Because that's my goal too. Or is that you want to, like, so if you want to do that, you still have to learn from the best. And really hard to say this, but America still has a really top-notch quality of animation. That's why I'm here to learn all the stuff that I can as well too. So my answer is both. Take the opportunity to see which one you have to take first, versus like the time limit that you have, especially if you're an international student, then you know that your time here is probably limited or running out. So you probably want to use that as much as you can first before you go back home and network as much as you can, get clients from the US if you need to, or find out how the different studios work. And then when you go back, you'll actually be like one of the people that they actually want to work in, the, like maybe the studios that work for the US studios here. Or by that time, you can also engage in your own local studio or something like that as well too.
So we have time for one more. A man in the back.
Hey guys, I just came in a little earlier, so you might have already answered this question, but as far as young people who are trying to get into the industry and taking the very first, very small steps into getting into the profession, what advice would you give?
Have a portfolio.
I'm not sure.
No, I did have a portfolio. Don't act like I was a unicorn. But that's what was my issue. You weren't here in the beginning, but my issue with being in America is that I knew, you know, as an animation student that you're supposed to have a portfolio. I just didn't do it. And so that's what was my struggle in getting a job in America. And then when they gave me the opportunity in Korea to create one, well, they asked me if I had one, and I said I can create one. That's when I got the opportunity. So prepare before you get the opportunity. Luck is when opportunity is preparation. So prepare your portfolio, whatever you're interested in, whatever the standard is, and what you're interested in, create that, and that will create your opportunities.
Okay.
My advice would be open to feedback and change. Whatever you do in life, whatever you work on, you're always going to get feedback on, positive and negative. You have to be able to accept that, and you have to be able to understand what you can take away from it and what you can't. So a lot of people I know have like these show ideas and stuff like that. Things that I've learned is that your initial pitch might change. So depending on how they want your show to be made, you have to be willing to either make those changes or not. So yeah.
For me, it'd be like find out what your weaknesses are and create a metric system that can help you like better that. So actually, this was a conversation I had with a friend yesterday, where one of the problems that they said that they were facing was being punctual. So like for certain things like, okay, meeting deadline, being punctual, if you're not doing certain things like, oh, you're giving estimates to people like, oh, I can do this and this, and you're not meeting it, create this thing where like for the whole month or two, do a log. Log in every time that you're doing work, or like if you're going to a meeting, something like that, create, like write down Were you late? Were you early? And if you were late, what was the reason? Out of that log, if you see that 1 or 2 month, 90% of the time, or if it's 70% of the time that you're not being punctual or not delivering, that means that you're probably setting a goal that's either too high, or you have to account for some of the things that are going wrong. So if you do that, a lot of times people cannot measure themselves. Other people can see what you're doing wrong or right, but you can't. So when you do that, it's almost like a little self-reflection that will help you from being discouraged. Where like, am I doing this right or wrong? Why is my portfolio never working? So if you send it to like maybe 5 or 10 websites and stuff like that, always ask them like, oh, like just write at the back like, oh, if possible, would love some feedback. Even if they don't, one company might, 1 or 2 might, or ask someone on LinkedIn what they think of the portfolio. Then you create a metric system based on that, like how many people say the same thing? If they say the same thing, is that something that you want to consider looking at your portfolio and changing? So try to do that with a lot of aspects in your life that you feel is going wrong, and that metric system will actually kind of help you to measure how you can fix that problem.
Yeah, sweet. Well, I'd like to thank everybody for coming out. This has been Animating Overseas.
I have a YouTube channel. Follow me at BlkWmnAnimator, BlkWmnAnimator. I go into detail of I have a couple stories. I got my P story, my Burger King story. I have Burger King story too, but
I know about
it's
that
kind of different. It involves
Advertisement?
Yes,
Get your plugs in.
Follow me at Roberto Ro. You can see I don't always post art stuff. I post stuff about my children, my kids, my life. Clouds, because I love clouds. Clouds are awesome. And yeah, just follow me there, either on Twitter or Instagram. And every once in a while I'll post up work or I'll post up something profound. Rarely.
Come out and join our animation mixer with the CIFA. There's a bunch of people sitting here that's actually part of the committee. They're all volunteers. But what we do is like we create like an organization that try to better the industry in not just Atlanta, but eventually different places. But we're starting with Atlanta first. And we do a free mixer every end of the month where we bring in a professional from a different studio to talk and kind of like give reviews or what their studio is about, and mainly to bring in network. And like James Nethery sitting over here, he's working with Lowbrow Studio as well. He was also working with Archer. He has yada 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 credentials. You can rush over to him, send your portfolio, get all his contact. He was also doing portfolio reviews this morning. Shuzo Shiota at the back there, he has a panel tomorrow as well about running animation studio. He's the CEO of Polygon Picture in Japan. So rush over there and mob him as well. And a bunch of people you can mob in the crowd too. That's my boyfriend, so don't mob him.
And if anybody has a question, I'll be willing to answer any questions that you have after this.
All right, thanks everybody. Appreciate it.